The Hockenfur Tangent. Chapter 1. New York City, January 15th, 2000. Leah wasn't technically late for anything but her own expectations. She'd planned to start watching a movie in about an hour. She still had lunch to make. Her non-vital schedule was shifting to a later time. It was a DVD, but she still got vaguely anxious when things were delayed or deferred. She called that aspect of her personality the hall monitor. It glowered and glared and looked at its watch and tapped its foot. She wondered why it was an it and not a she, but the ways of hall monitors were mysterious. It didn't like long lines at the store or her dithering with meal choices. Were there consequences? Not really. Just a game she played with herself, she supposed. Something that gave her arbitrary schedule some relevance, if only to a clock. She was distracted and rushing, 2 bags of groceries in her arms. She misjudged the distance between curb and street. Her right foot slid along a dark and treacherous sheet of fragile ice. Her boot heel punched through. Lurching momentum pitched her to the side. Her left boot heel stepped down hard on a man's foot, judging by the outcry. The freeze had gone irregularly to slush, so stepping on turned into awkward collision and mutually flailing collapse into the street. Insult to injury caprice showered them both with the disgorged contents of her grocery bags. Ruptured clamshell takeout packaging sprayed their vinegared and cream-sauced guts on the crime scene.
Fuck!
Oh God! Oh God! Oh God! That refrain started in her head and then became a chant through her lips, followed by, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry.
Ugh.
She gasped as the back of her coat slid up and she landed ass down in the steep slush pile, her hips having slid off his thigh. They had landed in Manhattan road filth and trash mixed with water in varying phases of spite. Her legs were sprawled over his as she kicked scattered clumps of offal off frantically. Looking at the guy's face, his eyes were closed in fatalistic acceptance. She struggled, sliding down further into road-based humiliation that sucked and pulled at her. She watched as his gloved hands spread their fingers for an extended moment, an apparent attempt to control his temper and accept his circumstances. He clenched his fists and then consciously relaxed his fingers slowly, with a long, measured breath. He blinked, and her impression was of a guy in his mid-20s. He was Caucasian, clean-shaven, with short, dark brown hair and hazel eyes. She expected to see fury building, but he was maintaining a softness around his face. Somehow, he was miraculously non-threatening. He succeeded in gathering frigid and spattered patience. He offered his hands to help her get some stability.
Stop kicking, please.
She took his hands and complied, trembling, but able to sit up.
Thank you.
She internally inserted the word she expected to hear from a random New Yorker. You clumsy bitch. But they stayed in her head. Had she fallen due to ataxia or just lack of attention, or both? Was she blaming the ice for something that was all her? No way to know. The hall monitor in her head was replaced with a nurse asking droning, rote questions. Her muscles were trembling from embarrassment and fatigue. She said again, horrified, I'm so sorry. That was entirely my fault. His lips hitched in a sardonic twist.
Yeah, but January helped.
She desperately wanted to burrow into the snowbank she was mired in until he went away, but instead she said, she sure did. She thought, yes, let's blame January. Please. His eyebrows raised.
January is female?
Obviously. He nodded absently as though that made sense.
Right, so standing up seems like a good plan.
Subversive to January's decree. I like it. How? He almost smiled.
You first.
She floundered for a bit, but he steadied her. She managed to mostly avoid the fractal, razor-rhymed grime mob behind her with his help. Thank you. Quicksand only goes down and sounds warm. This is up. and
Quick snow?
very slow and spiteful snow with owie and gross bits.
Right. From January.
She's cruel.
And is that soup?
Clam chowder.
Not a skimpy portion. Warm at least.
With a baguette.
New England?
No, the baguette is French. As for the chowder, that's a trick question. I live in Manhattan, but I have standards. There is no other chowder.
Right. And now there's no chowder at all. I ruined your lunch?
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Apologies.
All are mine. Sincerely. He was grinning, and he had really nice lips. His voice was also thankfully forgiving and as humor-laden as his jacket and jeans were with pesto and soup. He breathed in deeply, and she managed to struggle her legs off his with a minimum of flailing. He offered his shoulder for her to lean on as he steadied her other hand. He winced, and there was a yelp from him as she pulled her foot away from his. She'd pinned his foot in the collapsing ice when she'd stepped on it. She rushed to say, "I'm sorry." He waved a hand.
It's okay. I'm afraid my ankle's wrenched.
It felt like her hair had spontaneously developed the ability to blush. When she got to her feet, she extended her hand to him. She said, "Right. Okay. Which foot?" He gestured to his right foot. She asked, "So are you right-footed or left-footed?" He tilted his head.
What?
Never mind. She extended her hand to him. He looked at her dubiously.
Ma'am, if a gust of middling wind came by, it would blow you down the street. I don't think...
Well, don't pull me down. Just let me help stabilize you. He raised his eyebrows.
Right. Don't pull you down. Sorry.
Her hands were still warm. Her gloves were good, but the exterior was slush, sludge, spattered, and uninspiring as she extended it. He stared up at her and squinted.
At the risk of appearing ungentlemanly, there's no way I'm taking your hand. Just get to safety. Somewhere. Over there, please.
He gestured to the sidewalk behind her. She conceded with a sigh, walked carefully to the useless zone he indicated, and accepted the role, miserably, of trembling woman. She watched as he gingerly regained his feet, righting himself painfully with sharp intakes of breath and grimaces. He limped over and smiled down at her.
Right then. You're about the right height to be crutches.
He draped his arm around her shoulders and stood there. She glanced up at him with a jaundiced squint. He was about a foot taller than she was. He kept standing there. Her eyebrow went up.
See, if I move, I'll limp again. Limping isn't manly.
Thinking that limping isn't manly.
Touché.
She shrugged. French isn't manly either.
But it's beautiful.
Beauty transcends gender expectations.
Exactly. Thanks for knocking me on my ass. This is fun.
He shifted on his injured ankle, and his weight came down harder as pressure on her shoulders, but not pain. This was weird. She stared ahead, bemused and amused and dripping ick. Her jacket shifted in the chill breeze, and a passing shadow of cloud over the sun made her shiver. She waited. He made no attempt to move. She waited through waves of concealed irritation, discomfort, and amusement that were as fleeting and sharp as the shifting sun and shadow.
So, what's your name?
Leah.
That's not French.
No, but I don't have to be manly.
What language is Leah from?
Hebrew.
And are you? Hebrew?
No, Shiksa. My parents thought it was melodic.
It is. It suits you.
Thanks. I was disappointed to find out that it meant weary.
It does?
Well, I guess Hebrew women from thousands of years ago earned their weary.
You don't look tired, just cold.
She ignored that comment, because she could. I was further disappointed to find out that another potential translation is wild cow.
Okay, now that categorization of historical women is very manly.
She smiled agreeably. Sure is. When his laughter settled down, he looked at her speculatively, non-chowder warmth spreading from the humor and the camaraderie. The passage of sunlight through a riffle of cloud shreds sparkled on myriad points of water, slush, and ice. The sidewalk glittered where the sun's rays touched it in scattered whimsy. The city added sparkle deliberately to the sidewalks. Her father had said they added mica or silicon carbide, but she had thought he was saying silly cars, so the sidewalk was always full of silly cars to her. He tilted his head down.
I'm Jareth.
She immediately thought of Labyrinth and David Bowie, but didn't mention it. That movie was from when? 1986? He had to have gotten that name pre-Goblin King. She didn't ask the etymology because this guy was as white as Jim Henson. She did say, "Pleased to meet you, Jareth. Where to?" One of his eyebrows raised.
Is your place close?
Not saying, and we're not going there. He looked infinitely hurt.
But Leah, you wound me after you wounded me.
So, emergency room would be appropriate. He scowled.
I am not sitting for hours in a Manhattan ER covered in clam chowder and snow melt for a sore ankle.
So, where do you live? I can get you a cab. He shrugged.
Subway's fine, over there.
His shoulder gestured toward a station. I can get you a cab. He shrugged skeptically.
Maybe, but you can't pay for it, and that's too much in cab fare for me, considering where I'm going.
I can't pay?
No, I took your wallet.
You... What? He pulled his arm from around her shoulders and flipped her wallet open, reading off the info from her ID.
Leah Manis, 5'2", 22 years old, shoulder-length brown hair, green eyes. Seems to be in order. Oh, hey, look! Your apartment's close. Nice address.
God, she'd been so stupid. Her jacket hadn't been moving from the wind, but from him lifting her wallet. She knew better. She really did. Every caution about not being an easy mark on the streets catcalled her and made her ashamed. She had been witnessed being nice, responsible, and solicitous. She should be scared or offended. She really should be, but she was more chagrined. He carefully reached for her hand and put the wallet in the center of her palm, which he meticulously wiped free of grime and snowmelt as she mock glared at him. He hobbled away from her to stand clear and said,
I'm sorry. Habit.
Theft is a habit? He shrugged.
You're a New Yorker, aren't you? That's your address, right? Don't you know better than to trust any of us? I was kind of hoping you'd try to take advantage of me and steal my wallet. Then we could have negotiated terms of hostage exchange, but you just looked confused.
She rolled her eyes and shrugged. He wasn't wrong. She knew as much. Her father had told her when she was little, Leah, if you ever get lost in the city, the way to get where you want to go is to ask 5 people and then take the average answer. New Yorkers in general aren't really bad. They're just tricksters and opportunists. It's an image thing. You don't have to act like that, but just be ready for it, okay? Don't be a victim. Ever. Jareth had the native attitude. It was a sacred duty to tweak the tourist in spirit. He shook his head.
I'm disappointed in you, young lady. Why isn't theft your habit? In this case, theft is really just a temporary method, justified self-defense after you outright assaulted me. I don't like unanswered questions, and I've learned not to trust people's answers. I deprived you of lunch, dinner, and breakfast. Have lunch with me, please.
She tilted her head in incredulous parody. Lunch? You won't be breaking into my apartment? He was scandalized.
What? Leah, never. I mean, I would knock first. I would totally knock first. Trust me.
His smile belied any pain he was in, the softness of his features lending themselves to cherubic innocence. I ruined your clothes. Can I pay for dry cleaning or replacement?
Agree to lunch. We'll settle up then, okay?
Not lunch now.
No, not lunch now. That's crazy and I'm limping.
So, where do you live?
Are you kidding me? I'd never give my address out to a stranger. You clearly don't come from around these parts other than metaphorically. What's your phone number?
You want mine, but I can't have yours?
Maybe, when you're not a stranger.
I see.
Good. So?
He wasn't exactly handsome, but he was attractive, and his smile was a compelling thing. His eyes were studying her not hopefully, but patiently, and even confidently. She got the sense that being around him could be fun. She was sure if she said no, she wouldn't see him again. She gave him her number. The question of intrusion also wasn't a real concern. She did have a nice address, and there was excellent security. When he smiled blandly and didn't try to write it down, she closed her eyes in penny-drop realization. You already knew that. She recalled that her phone number was helpfully emblazoned on a medical alert card next to her ID, both clearly displayed through plastic inserts. He smiled at her, and she was struck by the radiant admiration and humor in his gaze.
Yeah, Leah, your wallet was enlightening. Thanks for giving me the real number.
She smiled back. You're welcome. He nodded.
Lunch it is. Tomorrow? How about...
He looked around and pointed to a Greek diner, Manhattanite code for at least they will have good coffee.
There? Noon? I'll call if there's any change in my schedule. There shouldn't be. Good bumping into you.
I can pay for your cab now.
Subway will do. At least people will stay away from me. I won't be the weirdest thing there in anybody's day. I'll be fine.
Okay then. Noon. He waved and limped his way to the subway station. She made it home. She didn't remember the trip later other than as a blend of ass frozen and hair blush on fire, shame and elation. She was more accountable to the nurse than to the hall monitor. She drew a hot bath. She threw her clothes into the trash, not wanting to be reminded of today in any way by seeing them later. Everything, purse, boots, gloves included. She ate cold Pop-Tarts in the tub. She kept a box of them in the bathroom medicine cabinet so she didn't have to detour to the kitchen. Everything turned mentally and emotionally tarnished and dull. She got out of the water right after she stopped freezing, right before she fell into the stupor that was as close as she got to sleep. She tried not to cry because it would cause a headache. She tried not to think of Jareth because if she thought about him, she'd likely talk herself out of going before the morning. She started to cry anyway, a familiar, aching continuum of gray timelessness the result. Her usual night. Someone had been briefly and extraordinarily kind to her, and that made this moment worse. She didn't want to invest in it, told herself he wouldn't be nice for long. It was like being allowed to have one bite of something delicious and no more when you were starving. She told herself that the alternative was not being able to have anything delicious at all. She tried to be hopeful and promised herself something other than cold Pop-Tarts for lunch tomorrow. It didn't really work to improve the experience, the stupor blurring over everything. Conclusions and decisions took too much energy. Crying took no energy. It was just a slow leak. Her life was a slow leak.